Well, it's a beautiful sunny day here in central London, so we thought we'd start the video in the street. And in today's video, we are going to feature some of the more debatable products and features on saxophones. So let's go inside and get started. We're over in the Saxaccessories department, and I'm going to start off with the hotly debated subject of tone-enhancing products. So let's put these two specific products through their paces and see what results we produce. First up, the Klangbogen, a tone enhancer that attaches into the lie hole on the saxophone. It's designed to rebalance the way the instrument vibrates, giving more focus, projection, and tonal depth by adding mass at a critical point. Okay, so what you heard me do just there, right at the end for that third test, was I readjusted the clang such that it's actually touching the tenon joint on the saxophone, because we get, in theory, a different response when it's in the touching position versus just in the position where we've got some air between the product and the saxophone itself. So in terms of the differences, I mean, I have to be honest here and say it's very hard to put in the kind of language whereby we've got an obvious result here. It's much more about feelings and nuances. I enjoyed the sound of the Yamaha initially just by itself. It took me a minute or so to adjust it and put it into place. I tried to play the same kind of thing to be as scientific as possible. And I think on that first A that I played, I felt like I had more of a kind of clarity of response and a kind of buzz which fed into the rest of the playing. And then immediately, as I say, I adjusted it so it was in this third position and touching. And it's easier to judge at this point because I have the immediate memory of the second test where I just played something, and I did feel this immediate difference, just an extra clarity perhaps and brightness, almost like the kind of upper harmonics were dancing around a little bit, and it was reflecting back off the instrument and feeding back to me. So I felt that difference. So it is certainly doing something, that is for sure. So before kind of concluding up, let's go on to our second tone enhancing product. The next one we're trying is the Yanagisawa Booster. This one replaces the neck screw and claims to add weight and stability to the upper register. Let's see if it really makes a difference. Sounds great. It sounded great beforehand. It's really hard to give you the honest answer on whether this thing here is making a notable difference. I think if I'm being totally honest, I would have to almost A/B it 1,000 times in a room, being really scientific and measured about it through all the registers of the instrument, because I think the differences are that fine. But it looks cool, you have to say that. So this one here is a heavy mass screw, and we've got the extra big attachment on it here. There's a slightly more narrow one here, and I'm sure, again, you could A/B it and see the difference between the narrow one and the heavy one, but we thought we'd get the big guns out for this particular test here. So in conclusion, this one, and then of course the Klangbogen, and then the differences, hard to say in terms of my gut feeling that the obvious differences and what's going on with it all without getting really involved and spending an hour in a room and kind of driving myself crazy, to be totally honest. With the Klang, there was more of an obvious difference when I was able to set it up in one position versus another position, where I definitely felt there was a difference going on. With this one, there is only one setting, and it's just plugging it in, it looking very big and fat, sitting there right in front of you and looking pretty cool. And I suppose, yes, I'm feeling some vibration, some nice response. It all feels great. There's no complaints about the sound, but I can't 100% stand here and say that this is a game-changing thing. It's really a case of splitting hairs. So really, when it comes to the tone enhancing things and perhaps correctional devices, if I'm going to be more technically accurate about it, the jury is very much out. Modern saxophones come packed with all sorts of features these days, and sometimes it's hard to know whether these features actually make a difference in the real world or whether they are simply marketing hype. And one such feature is the use of the double key arm on the low bell notes of the saxophone. Double arms are nothing new. They've been around for decades. Some brands claim they help add stability to the larger pads, like low C and B flat, and even enrich the tone. Others argue they just add unnecessary weight. I've got two identical saxophones here, one with double arms, one with single arms, so let's see if we can feel or hear a real difference. Okay, let's not beat about the bush here. You really can't pin the difference of tone that we're getting there. A slightly different tonal character I was feeling, just a slightly different response on the fact that this one here has double key arms on the low notes compared to this one here. Yes, I'm getting a slight difference, but yeah, let's not beat about the bush. The notion that they somehow improve the tonal response and give more solidity on these low notes, I think that's much more down to just the way the saxophone is set up and that the keypad is seated. And in this case here, yes, I'm getting a slightly different tonal response, but it's you just cannot pin it on the fact that these features are the defining factor. These features being the only difference between this particular Atlantic and this particular Atlantic. So marketing hype, to an extent, yes. There's no harm in having these double key arms because they do add that extra solidity. They add extra weight as well. So really, it's just one of those things. Don't be fooled into thinking that by having these arms, you're going to get this amazing response down here. And at the same time, if you just want a lighter horn without the arms, go for a saxophone that doesn't have the arms because it ain't going to make that much difference. Reeds, every sax player's best friend and yet worst enemy at the same time. But what if I told you there was a tool out there that could convert even the dodgiest reed into something that plays great? So today I am going to take a reed straight from the box, see how it performs, and then do some work on that reed and see if it makes a difference. My choice of reed here is the D'Addario Select Jazz 3 Soft Filed. Let's see how it sounds. Well, we've actually got quite a good starting point with this reed here. They don't often play as responsively and impressively as this, so okay, I've got some serious work on my hands here. Here, I'm using a ReedGeek tool, in this case, the Black Diamond G4, designed to flatten, smooth and fine-tune reeds so they seal better and vibrate more evenly. I start by removing any surplus material, anything that's out of square, from the back of the reed. I'm holding it up to the light here as this shows the light and dark areas of the scrape, therefore identifying areas of cane that can be worked on in order to achieve an even scrape. Here I introduced the reed plaque and gauge, and it is proving a really handy aid for doing more intricate tip work. I'm now using the radius tip section of the Geek to make adjustments to the tip of the reed. Let's hear how it sounds. So for me, the difference there wasn't exactly like night and day, and that's simply because the reed that I actually picked out the box was actually, to my surprise, performing pretty nicely. It's typical, isn't it? In a test like this, you pick out a reed, you're expecting it to be slightly dirgy, but no, it was actually responding quite well. However, that said, I did make some slight improvements to it, and I found that the reed was a little bit more responsive having made those adjustments. And I should also say at this point, having met Mauro a few times, the genius behind this particular tool, the ReedGeek, the difference that he has made to some of my older dodgy reeds, or even new reeds that are just not that great out the packet, has been absolutely incredible. He's just put a smile on my face every time he does the work. So I should also say at this stage that I'm not Mauro. I wish I was. I wish I had his skill in adjusting reeds. I just have like maybe a medium level of skill. I understand the basics. And I think for many of you out there, it's probably a similar story. So I think really with this tool, you do need to spend some time with it to really learn what it's doing. Yes, it can be expensive working on reeds, but if a reed is a duffer, it's only going to go one way and it's going to improve. So I suppose you could look at it in that sense. So really in conclusion, I really think that the ReedGeek is worth its weight in gold. I think it's a tool that every sax player should take to gigs and be on hand to adjust new reeds or even old reeds just to give them a new lease of life. I think they're absolutely fantastic and seriously not a gimmick in this case. Saxophones were actually originally designed without a top F sharp key, rather like this one here. But at some point later on down the line, most manufacturers adopted using a top F sharp key to give that saxophone one extra crucial note on the top. However, some purists may argue that having that F sharp key affects the airflow of the instrument. Here I've got two Yamaha saxophones, one with the high F sharp key and one without. You can see here, to add the key, they had to drill an extra tone hole in the body. The theory is this could slightly disturb the airflow and affect the tone at this critical area of the sax. Let's test them side by side. So before now launching into the perhaps slightly more controversial subject of no F sharp versus F sharp key, I want to first of all point out that this Yamaha horn here, without a top F sharp key, plays a top F sharp beautifully. And as you can hear, the sound pops out very nicely. So just in brief here, what I'm doing fingering-wise there is I'm using the auxiliary F key here, and on the left hand and on the right hand, I'm using the side B flat and the F key to give us a nice sort of rich popping F sharp. And the reason I mention this is that when we play a horn with standard F sharp fingering in the palm keys, we have a much thinner sounding alternative. Obviously, I can't demonstrate it on this horn because that is where the key would be, and we don't have it anymore. So we are forced to use the fingering just described. But for me personally, I use this fingering 100% of the time on my tenor. I think it's a great sounding alternative F sharp, and this is the fingering that basically any tenor player who was to buy this instrument would adopt if you were to buy this wonderful instrument. But now, let's just move on to comparing this horn with another Yamaha custom instrument with an F sharp key. Okay, so if we're just doing a sort of A-B comparison, I mean, first of all, I do have to point out we've got a slightly different Yamaha here. We've got a custom EX versus the Z there. So perhaps it's an unfair immediate comparison just to talk about it in terms of the top F sharp key. But it's more about the wider topic that interests me. So there I was using the fingering mentioned previously with this side B flat for both F sharps. In terms of the way it popped out for me around that area, pretty similar really. I'm finding I'm getting a slightly heavier sound on this, the EX, versus the custom Z, where there's a little bit more free flow of sound going through the horn. So whether the lack of F sharp key on that instrument has anything to do with it, because the idea is that we've got the air moving through very freely at this point here. There's no disturbance in this area, which we do have with this instrument here because we have the F sharp key right at the top here, creating that disturbance at this point here. But just back to, for example, my personal situation, and this might mirror perhaps what a lot of players out there think in terms of this subject. I have a modern horn that has an F sharp key on it, Yeah, I don't actually use that palm key fingering. As I say, I exclusively, 100% of the time, use the alternative key. And so perhaps you might say, well, why didn't I choose an instrument without the F-sharp key? The fact of the matter is there's not that many modern horns available without the F-sharp key, so you're kind of forced to buy an instrument with the F-sharp key on it. At the same time, it doesn't offend me. It's just sitting there in the background. Potentially, I could use it for some alternative altissimo fingerings. It is in use for some notes, should you choose to do so, but I don't. I just purely have it sitting there kind of doing nothing. So in a sense, you could argue it is a bit redundant. But at the same time, the manufacturers these days put on that F-sharp key because they're dealing with the wider base of people who go through the education system where you would learn through the palm keys up to top F-sharp. And that's a standard way of learning before perhaps you move on to more advanced things and you start thinking about the altissimo and these alternative, slightly creamier sounding notes like I'm demonstrating there with that top F-sharp. It works on any horn and acts as a gateway into the altissimo. Next up, ligatures. Now, most people would agree that it's worth upgrading from a basic stock ligature to something like this. But the question is it worth considering some of these ultra expensive premium ligatures like this? First, I've got the Rovner ligature, probably the most popular ligature in the world. It's easy to use, super durable, and it won't break the bank. For most players, it absolutely does the job. And then I'm putting it up against the Silverstein Hexa, a ligature that costs nearly 10 times the price. The Hexa uses aerospace grade cord, has fine tuner weights you can adjust, and the metal is cryogenically frozen to minus 300 degrees Fahrenheit to enhance resonance and strength. It's even got small crystals embedded into it. But does any of that actually make a difference when you play it? So this Silverstein ligature is actually worth about 10 times that of the Rovner ligature there. Can we hear 10 times the difference? Of course, you all know the answer is no. You can't improve something that's sounding as basically as good as what we're getting with the Rovner ligature by 10 times factor. That would be ridiculous. So it's all about nuances, right? I'm definitely hearing nuances, and more crucially, and I think this is a sort of general theme for this whole video, feeling differences. I don't know how it comes across to you, but I'm getting more spark in the sound with this ligature, more upper harmonics. It feels like I could just push the sound a little bit more and just get that extra sparkle and freedom in the sound. That said, it's heavily nuanced. I'm sure that if I went out and played this in a gig versus this in a gig with all those other instruments wrapping around me, none of my colleagues would notice a thing. And it would be, if I'm going to notice anything, it would be, it would be a very subtle thing. And I think it's only in this environment here when we are completely in silence and we're doing these kind of slightly more controlled scientific tests that you feel these subtleties. And I think that the more general remark when it comes to considering really expensive ligatures like this is not how much it radically improves your performance, but it's more just those little boosts and pieces of assistance that it can give you in the way you can perhaps control the sound. And that can therefore make you feel better. It gives you more confidence. It can perhaps open up your performance more if you just know that you have that extra control at your disposal. But just going back to the raw subject of that ligature versus this ligature, the Rovner for me is a really solid sounding ligature. It's got slightly darker hues in the way it comes across. This one has got perhaps a bit more sophistication in those upper harmonics. So there's a little something going on there. I'd be interested to see or to hear about what you guys think in the comments, because some people will say, oh yeah, I put my headphones on, I could hear this and I could hear this. And others will just say it's a load of rubbish. And I'm willing to listen to all of those comments. But it's interesting to test them again, just to see that you are getting just a little bit of something going on with the incredible technology in these expensive ligatures.